So here we have the Fick's law, which is going to be used to explain the capacity of gases to diffuse between different tissues. There's 4 influencing factors that determine how much oxygen, for example, can diffuse into the bloodstream. The same determinants work for any gas. The properties of CO2 are a little bit different from oxygen, so the same rules still apply for this, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in a different slide. We are also going to see the name Fick coming back into our class, as Fick's equation is used to determine VO2 max. But right here we're looking at the step before the tissues can absorb oxygen, talking about the absorption of oxygen through the alveolar wall towards the capillary. So there's 4 determinants that are going to determine how much of a gas can be diffused into a liquid, starting here with A, which stands for surface area and helps to explain the shape of the alveoli. So the reason why the alveoli is shaped in a circular fashion is to increase the surface area into is exposed to the capillaries and veins. There is about 300 million of this within our lungs. So you can imagine that the amount of area exposed of alveoli to capillaries is quite vast. Inversely related to diffusion ability is T, which stands for membrane thickness, which goes back to a previous slide talking about the respiratory membrane. The reason why it's inversely related to diffusion is because more layers here will decrease the ability of gases to diffuse. So the membrane thickness as far as alveoli is concerned is the walls of the alveoli represented here in the purple shaded area as they meet the walls of the capillary represented here in the red. You can even see the red blood cell in there as oxygen moves in and CO2 moves out. The thicker the membrane, the more steps and the harder gases become to diffuse into the subsequent tissue. So it is important for the body to keep that membrane thickness thin as it is spread through its entire surface area. The one that we're not going to worry too much about, but it becomes relevant when it talks about the diffusion of CO2 into the blood, is D, which is a diffusion constant, which refers to the gas solubility, meaning that there is only a certain amount of gas that can be diffused into a liquid. Trying to pump more gas once that maximum has been reached is not going to cause more gas to be dissolved into the liquid. So there's only so much diffusion that can occur from a gas to be present in a liquid. The most important determinant of diffusion is with the pressure gradient. And the reason for that is that for, thinking about the physiology of the body, the surface area to alveoli is not going to increase. Typically, it does decrease, especially if you are a smoker, because that is going to destroy alveoli tissue. But typically, surface area is not going to increase, not even with training. So for the most part, it remains relatively constant. The same is true about the membrane thickness. We're not going to necessarily add more areas here unless there's fluid that builds up into your alveoli, which it can come from inflammation, pneumonia, and again, destruction of the tissues via smoking. But typically, the membrane is not going to become any thinner. So we're not going to change surface area, we're not going to change membrane thickness, and we're not going to change the chemistry of gases. So for the most part, the most influencing variable that dictates diffusion of gases across the membrane wall is going to be the pressure gradient. And we already have established with previous slides that the pressure differential is about 65 millimeters of mercury, as there is 105 millimeters of pressure in the alveoli to 40 millimeters of pressure that occurs into the pulmonary artery. Those pressures, as we talked about in altitude, will change, and also during exercise, because the amount of oxygen that is in the pulmonary artery is going to be reduced because the tissues utilize more. I'm going to reserve the conversation about pressure and how it regulates diffusion of oxygen into the capillaries into our next slide.